can I begin by acknowledging that we are here on the traditional lands of the Boon Wurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we acknowledge elders past and present and elders from any other communities who are joining us tonight. And welcome to this MIFF Talk, which is presented by The Age. Long live independent journalism, may it continue in these troubled times. We are here to talk about sex on screen, and particularly sex as a means of telling story. Whether it's erotic or sweet or sinister, it can be a way of exploring conflict, power dynamic, a way to reveal character or explore questions of identity and boundaries. There's so much we could cover in this very short hour, but the uniting theme, I guess, is about intimacy, authenticity of intimacy. So we have got a fabulous panel here to talk about that tonight, starting with the magnificent Tony Ayres, who has a very long history with Melbourne International Film Festival, and it's hard to even run through his credits, there's so many, but starting maybe with Home Song Stories, was that a MIFF film?
Yes, I think so.
I think it was. And obviously responsible for amazing series like Nowhere Boys and The Slap. We then have Miranda Nation, whose feature debut, Undertow, screened twice in the past week to acclaim, and she's also an Accelerator alumni. Then we have Thomas M. Wright, who also premiered his fabulous film last Saturday night, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Saturday.
Yeah. And also to acclaim, and in fact you even picked up the MIFF, the Age Writers' Prize. Well done.
The Age Critics' Prize, yeah.
That's it. And also, and I think we've seen you before at MIFF as an actor on screen in Ballabo and...
Top of the Lake.
Top of the Lake, and Van Diemen's Land maybe as well.
Maybe.
And then we have our MIFF ambassador, Sarah Snook. And Sarah's appeared in some shorts, but I remember you as opening of with Predestination, which was opening night a few years ago, which was such an amazing film. So awesome to have such a great panel. And let's get into the discussion. Tony, I'm going to start with you. This is your favourite topic, I know. The Hollywood cinema obviously has a certain reputation in terms of the way it conveys sex on screen and intimacy. International cinema has a very different reputation. Is there an Australian sensibility when it comes to depicting sex on screen?
The one word I would use is awkward.
Awkward. I think many people in the room can relate to that. There are many filmmakers here tonight.
Yeah. I think that there is a kind of Australian sensibility which is trying to go for something real, and I think we're caught in between the candy gloss of American cinema sex, which is basically 4 shots, basically pretty much the same 4 shots in virtually every film, and the kind of graphic reality of European cinema sex. And I often think of my favourite sex scenes in Australian movies, like Praise, for instance. I thought the sex scenes in Praise were phenomenal, but they were kind of awkward. They were real, and they talk about the difficulty of sex often more than the pleasure of sex.
So there was intentionally awkward sex in that case, but there's there's unintentionally awkward sex on screen too, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thomas, how comfortable do you think Australian audiences are with sex on screen, and what would you like to be seeing more of?
Look, I think I can probably speak to that by talking also about something that, I've really appreciated in Australian cinema. When I was thinking about this panel, I was sort of thinking, were there any particular scenes in films that I thought, that's right, that's kind of the way that something like this should be handled? And I think Amiel Courtin-Wilson made a film in, I think it must be about 2011, called Hail. And the film concerns a crim in his 50s, Danny Jones, and the film's based on his life story and features him and his real partner, whose name's Leanne Lech. And at the very beginning of the film, Danny is let out of jail, presumably after being in there for a fairly long period of time, and he's reunited in the backyard with Leanne, and they kind of jump up and embrace each other. They go into the house and she takes him around and they're sort of talking about what's changed and what's not changed. And then there's this most astonishing sex scene. It's probably my favourite sex scene almost in the history of cinema, because it's so intimate, it's so simple, it's so essential to the film, to what's happening, to understanding this relationship, and to grounding it in this kind of very intimate reality of connection that's happening between these two people. I'm sure it's real sex. The camera is very intimately sort of in there with them, but it's not graphic at all. And these are older people who've led very, very hard lives with drug addiction and alcoholism and that sort of thing. And the thing that struck me about it is I thought that in American cinema, the only reason you would ever see these two people having sex was either for shock value or for comedy. And that's so demeaning. And I just thought that the intimacy and the sense of connection, and the sense that you were being allowed into this kind of privileged moment in this relationship and this very physical form of communication. So that's the kind of thing that I would probably advocate for seeing more of, is sex that doesn't reduce sex to a visual idea, that's both essential to narrative and also revealing of people, and that kind of transcends the boundaries between people.
So I see you nodding your head there, Sarah. Snoop.
Well, yeah, I feel like so often sex gets glossed over in, we were talking about this earlier about that it becomes a montage, that you get all the foreplay stuff of the dialogue and the banter and then the kiss, and then it's, oh, we all know they're about to have sex, so quickly let's see some shots of feet, and we'll do those 4 shots that most people do in a
What
in
are
a
the 4
film.
shots too? What are the 4 shots?
The side boob.
Right.
The side boob. Most often focused on the woman's face, because somehow reason we don't want to see men's faces in sex.
Or penises.
Or penises. I don't know how that decided. Maybe there's some sort of male domination, heterosexual kind of thing going on. But it's never really used as a project, like a pushing forward or a progression of narrative, and that I think is really lacking. I mean, that's the most intimate moment that either of these characters are ever going to have, whether it's consensual or not, and that is the most telling moment a person can give to another. So why wouldn't you want to share what that is for those two people in that moment with an audience?
There's one thing I just wanted to mention, which is probably my favourite international example, and it's because I appreciate narrative film. That's why I enjoy film, because I think to approach narrative and to approach it in diverse ways is what you want to do. And there's an Ang Lee film called Lust Caution, where the title says it all, but the narrative is between a woman who's trying to infiltrate, a kind of political situation, and is placed there to seduce and have sex with this incredibly violent kind of guy, and the story is told through the sex that happens between these people, and it's the engine of the story, and it's incredibly compelling. Horrible ending to that film, but great sex scenes.
Follow-up question to Sarah. So when you're often reading new scripts, how is it when you come across a sex scene? What goes through your mind? What sort of tests are you subjecting it to?
I mean, when reading a script and you find that there's a sex scene in it, for the most part, I tend to wonder how it's going to be shot, how it is written in the script, if it is glossed over because the writer feels uncomfortable writing that kind of material. I look at what the director who is attached, if they're attached already, what they have shot already, if they have shot a sex scene, what their taste is for the style of sex scene or the style of films they've created before. Because it's a very vulnerable thing for any human being, but then as an actor you have to go and do it in front of other people, and it's a very strange, unsexy thing to do, really, in front of like a room of people. So, reading material like that's... and is it progressing the narrative?
Awesome. Miranda, you created a really interesting lens of your character and her inner world, and you worked with a pretty fabulous DP, Bonnie Elliott. You talked a little bit about wanting to bring a female gaze to the project. What does that mean, and what did that involve? What discussions did you guys have?
Well, I suppose the film deals a lot with the body and our relationships with our bodies and our sexuality. So it seemed really important that nudity and sex was a part of that story. There's actually 3 sex scenes in the film, and each of them, I hope, really progresses the narrative and tells us something about the characters. Bonnie and I talked a lot about... We did talk about the concept of the female gaze, and what that meant to us was, never having a sex scene that was for a gratuitous reason or objectifying the characters or their physicality. So always something that progressed the narrative and told us something about the characters, and also an authentic gaze on the body. So how the characters are seeing their own bodies rather than, the kind of the theorised male gaze, which is inviting the viewer to be from the perspective of the often male protagonist, and having the woman as a thing to be looked at or a thing to be desired. In our case, we really wanted to show the way that the woman was seeing her own body, and So
is it possible that the whole solution to this history of the male gaze is really just approaching filmmaking with a sense of empathy for your characters? If so, solved.
Yeah. It's complex, isn't it? Because we're actually talking about the way that we learn about sex too. We actually come to learn a lot about sex from the cinema that we see. We receive a lot of shit, obviously. Yeah. We're actually, in fact, I think actually kind of fed lies. And it's actually the responsibility of the individual to find what the actual truth is and find that through their relationships. But that negotiation's incredibly difficult because we've just been taught that sex is 2 beautiful people looking at each other and a third eye in the room.
And
that's
coming at the same time.
Fucking thing.
What's that?
And coming at the same time.
And coming at the same time.
No, also the one where they're like, there's no mess. It's like, rolled over. Well, that was good. What's the woman doing? What's she cleaning up? Like, what's the, come on, what are the details of the practicalities of sex? And that is completely glossed over.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's
true.
ridiculous.
Tony, tell me, what do you think, what is authentic sex on screen, and how do you achieve it, and how hard is that?
Sex is a dilemma for me as a director because, most of the time, my work as a director is to try to be the first audience for the actors and to feel what the story needs me to feel at a particular moment. And so if you're directing a sex scene and the story needs you to feel aroused, it just doesn't feel right. It feels very, awkward, that word I keep coming back to. Yeah. So, and the thing is, sex, most of the time when we make things, we're trying to get to something authentic. We're trying to get to something real. And 2 things as an audience we know are not real are sex and death on screen. Because, unless it's porn, you kind of know it's not real. And then and yet we're so graphic about death on screen. You can see it in so many ways, and yet we're often incredibly coy about sex on screen. And so, and that can be appropriate or not appropriate, but I think there's a contradiction in the way that sex works on screen, which I haven't quite got my head around yet. I guess I would say, as a director, for me, the sex scene has to be consensual. It has to be a collaboration with the actors. And it has to be, to be honest, the best sex scene I ever directed, basically the actors told me what they felt comfortable with, what they wanted to do, and what their limits were. And I turned the camera on and I sort of said, yes, that tells me what I need to know. And that worked. It worked really well for me, And I don't think that. I think you if you do it any other way, it gets a bit. It feels like non-consensual sex. If you try to push actors beyond what their comfort levels are, it's another way of harassing people.
It's interesting because actually, it's interesting that you mentioned sex and death. I think also violence is an extension of that. And as an actor, when you go to enact violence, you're not actually thinking, I'm going to fuck this person up. Here we go. All it is about safety.
Yeah.
You draw a line, and it doesn't matter who you are. And if you break that line, you're just a fucking asshole, just like you would be in real life. It's like you're there to look after each other. And also, I think you should be actively turning it into a joke, personally. I've had to shoot so much sex scenes, just ridiculous amounts of sex scenes. And Top of the Lake was just me and Elizabeth Moss nude for about a month and a half. And there are a lot of sex scenes that aren't in that series. There's about 3 more because Jane just wanted to tell the story through sex, to the point that it became kind of, there was a comic sort of sex scene where we were drinking Gatorade, and the implication was we'd been having sex for like hours. And you know, we just mucked around. We just laughed and looked after each other and turned it into a joke, because I think that's kind of what you owe to each other. Yeah.
So, Thomas, what sort of conversations did you have with Jane in preparation for that particular role?
Oh yeah, how to be sexy. That was pretty horrible.
Really?
I don't feel comfortable being sexy at all. I think,
wanted
you know,
to
like
be
we always talk about, because I've had to do a lot of nudity and that sort of thing on, I mean, I'm sort of joking when I say that, but, you know, I've had to do a lot of nudity on stage and that sort of thing as well. It's very easy to be funny and naked, and it's very easy to be ugly and interesting and naked. It's very hard to be beautiful and naked, and I think that's the unrealistic and kind of obscene thing that gets pushed onto women in film a lot as well.
That's the most confronting as well for an audience, to be presented with beautiful and naked, particularly on stage in the theatre. And it's utterly distracting. Like, I've never seen a stage show that involved nudity where the person was beautiful and naked and sexy, or being that, or trying to be that, and I listened to any of the dialogue. Because you're like, whoa!
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Well, I wish I could do that. And instead, you know, but the times that I've seen, there's a Stephen Sewell film, not a play, but he is a playwright. I can't remember the name of the film. It was like 4 years ago.
It's called...
It's two-hander.
Embedded.
Yes, Embedded. And they're nude for a lot of it. And they're very beautiful people, but the nudity in it is secondary to the battle of their minds. And they're in the shower, you know, showering, the nudity is almost incidental.
They're husband and wife in real life. You know?
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that shows then, because they were so comfortable, and it was thrilling. It was like really engaging to watch the film, and I felt it dealt with nudity and with sex in one of the better ways that I've seen Australian cinema deal with it, because it was about the engagement of the mind rather than to make it beautiful somehow, and they were just really comfortable.
Just to return to your question about Jane too, I think with Jane it was really just about, you know, sex is communication. It's just another form of communication. It's an incredible form of communication, you know, in terms of what it's capable of in every direction. But, you know, it was really about, you know, who are these people, how do they relate to one another, and how do we bring their all the intimate details of their relationship and the kind of engine that it is for this series, and tell it through the sex that's in the film, in the series.
So, Thomas, having had that experience as an actor, you came to direct your feature, Acute Misfortune. How did that inform your process? What was your process with the actors?
Oh, look,
because you had nudity and
just
you
want to
had
add
sex.
this to the question that went to Tony before, is that as a filmmaker, you know, there's a huge process involved in this too, about talking with the actors, even bringing them on. Thank you. And talking and negotiating the contracts.
Yeah,
even
you've got to negotiate nudity clauses.
That's right. And so then you have to establish that very early on with the actors about how are you going to be covering this and how are you going to be looking after them and that sort of thing. And then, you know, look, I think it just made me probably more comfortable with it. The fact that I've done it so much. I was also directing 2 men, and I'm not gay, and I didn't have much experience of that sort of sex, but I had a very clear directive from my co-writer, who it's depicting in the film, that he felt that there was a sex that he'd engaged with a lot in his life that he didn't see represented on film, and he wanted to see that. And the interesting thing for us was to go very deep into a moment of intimacy and a moment of connection and a revelation about the character, and introducing sexuality into the film, which can firmly say that Adam Cullen would have hated, and good that it's in the film, because the film needed to deal with that aspect, of the character and their life and their perspective and what they were bringing to this relationship. And yeah, we just tried to make it as try to make it as enjoyable an experience as possible for them.
Miranda, you've also been an actor. How did you approach the sex? You had 3 sex scenes in your film. How did you prepare the actors? Did you rehearse? Did you choreograph? Was it collaborative?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion around it and what each sex scene, the purpose of it was in the script. We actually had 5. One that got cut and then one that's actually kind of just shown on a phone in the film. For most of them, we talked about them a lot. In rehearsals, we kind of blocked them out very technically, just, with clothes on, obviously, and just saying these are the angles we're going to be using. It was like, almost like drawing diagrams so that everyone kind of knew what to expect and felt really prepared and everyone was comfortable. With the one that is shown just briefly in the film on a phone, we actually shot that, and it was a difficult one because it's like a scene at a party where there's a few people involved in a kind of group sex scenario, and we shot that, and because the people that were playing the roles were essentially kind of featured extras, on the day it just went terribly wrong. They were not comfortable even sort of having a shirt off, so in the end we had to reshoot that with pickups, and because it had been so hard the first time, we discussed it and we thought that the best way to approach it was to use some actors who were from the erotic entertainment industry. So we actually found some people through mutual friends who were from that industry, from sort of like escort and porn industry essentially, and used them, but which worked better because they were people who were used to having their clothes off on camera. But funnily enough, they also felt slightly uncomfortable. They said this is not what it's usually like, all the stopping and starting. They're usually like you just go and you just go all the way through and there's no cut and action. So they actually found that, they dealt with it fine and it worked, but they found that
so
kind of
with
unusual.
that interesting learning, how would you tackle a scene like that in the future? Would you go straight to the erotic actors again, and would you maybe go for a continuous really long take?
Possibly. I mean, the difficulty in that situation was, as I said, that these weren't the lead actors. So I think when you've got a sex scene that's involving some of the lead actors, then you've got that time with them to rehearse and for everyone to be comfortable with each other, to build trust. But when it was a really hard one. I don't know. I have to reflect on what the lessons from that were.
Interesting. Sarah, it strikes me that as an actor, there's 2 layers of kind of vulnerability. There's actually being on set and perhaps being naked and perhaps doing a sex scene, and then there's also that whatever is recorded can end up on the big screen. You don't don't always have a right of sign off on a cut. How do you I guess empower yourself or protect yourself so that you are coming from a place of strength when you're on set shooting something like this?
I think you've just made me think that I think there are some people who can write into a contract the sign off on cut on the sex scene, which is a way to empower yourself and have more control over something that's very intimate. I know that when I have the first one I ever did on Not Suitable for Children, Ryan Quanton was really great because he had done so many on True Blood. That he sort of was very schooled in that sort of realm, and after every take, he was like, "I know this is really awkward and probably very weird for you, but we can actually, you do have the right to review the split and to review the footage that they're capturing," and encouraged me to do so that you know what you look like, you know what the shot is, you know exactly how the DOP is covering it, and what the lighting's doing, and what you need to do to protect yourself physically, in a visual sense, from showing too much, showing too little, just so you're across it, which was really good to know that. And in terms of it's just an awkward thing, really, because the whole point, really, I guess, of sex is to lose yourself. You're not performing, and there's a sense, I guess, in the pornography industry that's making it more of a performance, that sex is a performance, but it's not. It's the loss of yourself within another person, which is great. So the strangest thing then is to have a bunch of people watching you do that, and then not only do that, then you become exceptionally self-conscious of you don't want to know what you look like in that moment. That's the whole point, to get rid of that idea of what you look like. And then to have that then seen on camera, and to, you know, there's the desire to want to look beautiful or sexy or whatever because of your fucking ego. But one of the best examples I saw recently of sex on screen was in Jill Soloway's I Love Dick. I don't know if anyone here has seen that. I really recommend it. It's really great. And if you hear it at a Sex on Screen panel, you'd probably be interested in it.
Tell us a little bit about it for those who
It's about a couple who moved to Martha in Texas, and they one is to do an artist residency, and through the woman's Catherine Hahn's crush on Kevin Bacon's character, their sex life is reignited, and you know, then the story continues. But the sex between the husband and wife, Catherine Hahn and Griffin Dunn, is so realistic and natural and sexy and awkward and weird, and it sort of covers all the bases in it's full on as well as in that sort of European reality cinema way, but it's not. It never feels exploitative and never feels too excessive. It feels, again, like it's pushing the narrative forward, that these two people are very comfortable in all the lumps and bumps and awkwardnesses of their bodies, and that they have a real friendship and intimacy, not just as characters you can see as actors. And I feel like that's come through the respect that the director has had for the actors doing what they are doing and giving her what they're giving on screen.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think traditionally we think of America as having this very formulaic approach, but there is this real indie kind of current of awesomeness, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's still, you know, like the visual of it is still sort of glossy candy, but it's not so much so that it's alienating and not real.
Yeah, right. Tony, when we were talking the other day about this subject, you talked about the importance of subtext in a sex scene. Can you talk a bit about that?
I think that every action in cinema or every action in dramatic storytelling has to be about something else. You know, like it's what the characters say and do is not necessarily the meaning of it, and that's what creates subtext. And for me, sex scenes are most interesting when they're about something other than sex. When a great show for that is The Americans, which is, you know, some of the meanings of the sex scenes. I mean, the sex scenes in there very rarely mean anything else, because I mean the context of it is that these are two Russian spies who play a married couple, but as part of their work as spies, they have to go off and fuck other people sometimes. And so when they get back together as a married couple and have a sex scene after they both know that the husband is having a deliberate affair with a woman who works for the FBI, the sex scene is so loaded and so incredible. And for me, that's when the sex scene comes alive. And when it's not alive, I mean, because I read a lot of scripts for my work, and you know the sex scene is going to be a bit of a dud when you see in it, and they have sex. Oh. And I can't tell you how often I read that.
Really?
You know, they get together and they have sex. That's the one line. Because actually it's got to be about something else. It's got to be about, you know, the power and dynamic in the relationship. It has to be about other kinds of feelings, about their sense of who they are. It's got, you know, the more loaded it is for me, the more interesting it is. Otherwise, you know,
it's just a little time out.
Well, you know, really, you're better off watching porn.
Worst thing it can, definitely. The worst thing it can possibly be is something to keep people interested. It's so cynical. It's the same as shooting someone in the fucking head with a gun in a film, which is just like, oh, for God's sake.
Again.
Like, we haven't seen enough violence, you know?
Yeah.
See violence in the paper every day. Why don't we be entertained by some random act of violence just to keep us engaged, you know? And I think the same goes for sex scenes, when it's just a cynical thing to sort of like, right, you know, grab the audience back for a second, grab their attention back for a moment.
Unfortunately, it's almost always, yep, just show a pair of tits, we'll keep them watching.
Yeah, that's right.
Rather than anything
exactly
else.
right.
Bum in a G-string.
Or a bum in a G-string,
In the background,
or it's like the women's bodies are objectified in that to keep to keep the interest and to keep the people watching.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of sort of dick on TV in that context, do you? Just, here's a quick bit of dick to keep you engaged.
Which probably would be more engaging because you don't see it very
Like, oh.
often.
It's missing from TV right now. So, Miranda, tell me, does your script say, and then they have sex? No. What does it say? What should it look like on the page? What should writers be writing?
Well, I think, I can't remember how the script went now, but I think it needs to go into some detail that, as Tony said, then sort of betrays what's underlying the act and what the true meaning of the scene is.
So are you talking about what's happening psychologically in those characters, or should that be implicit?
I think that should be implicit in the actions.
Yeah. And tell me about your favourite. What's a memorable sex scene for you on screen?
I always think about the sex scene in Red Road. You guys remember that? In Andrea Arnold's first film.
Oh, yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah. And
Tell us about that.
That
For
felt
those who haven't
really
seen the film.
authentic. I feel like I can't really tell the context of it because if people haven't seen it, it will give the whole...
No.
Anyway, it's a one-night stand.
Give it away.
And,
Go on.
and what you later find out is that this is the man that has accidentally killed her husband and child in a hit and run, and she's kind of stalking him. But you don't know that at the time, but you know that there's this really odd, sort of disconcerting, alarming relationship between them, and it's a one-night stand, and it's just so authentic. I mean, it seems like real sex, but I think both of the actors were relatively unknown at the time, and they obviously had a real trust on set, and it's a scene that just feels so authentic and a bit raw and brutal and ugly, but also sexy. I
think it seems like real sex because you see his heart on.
Well, yeah,
and
that's a
so
good point.
you never see that in films.
Yeah.
Very rarely.
Under the Skin. Fantastic.
Oh,
Not a
yeah,
sex
yeah.
scene, but sometimes no sex is fantastic sex. Actually, in Elena Lodkina's film Strange Colours, which played last night, and it's playing tomorrow, and if any of you haven't seen it, I'd really very seriously encourage you to go and see the film, because I'm about to give away something, which is that they don't have sex. They don't have sex and nobody dies, and it's the tension that either of those things could happen that kind of provides a little like ticking clock on the wall, in the film. Just keeps, a certain amount of engagement, a certain amount of threat and atmosphere, in the film. And Under the Skin, that extraordinary Jonathan Glazer film where Scarlett Johansson probably plays an angel driving around in a van in Glasgow to seduce men and bring them into some sort of black lake that liquefies them for some alien purpose. I don't know why. But you see those men walking along with their hard-ons into the black lake. It's just spectacular.
Fabulous. Sarah, you have been doing some viewing at the festival this week, and you were telling me about a film you saw which had a really interesting scene, a sex scene.
Yeah, Alanis. I don't know if anyone here saw it, but it's a film about a prostitute, and I think it's an Argentinian film, but basically premise in Argentina, if it is Argentina, the South American country, brothels are illegal, but prostitution isn't, which I think is really kind of perverse.
That's weird.
Yeah, you'd think that brothels would offer more protection, but that's not the case. But this sex scene that you expect her to engage in a sex scene at some point because she is a prostitute, and that she does need to find some money, and that is the way that she ends up. She is a cleaner for a couple of moments, a day or so, and then goes back to prostitution. But she never. I was really interested by the confronting, I guess, dialogue and the confronting nature of the scene, because it was consensual in that she was being paid for it, but you can clearly understand that she wasn't necessarily enjoying it and becoming not distressed but pissed off during the scene. And yet at no point did she manage to lose, through the director's setups, the shots, what have you, never lost any power. And I thought that was a really interesting way to... it's just unusual, I guess, because the situation is that she's being taken from behind by the man, and he's being quite aggressive to her and saying, call me names, blah, 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 you slut, you whore, calling her names. But the way that she responds is not not to give him exactly what he wanted or needed, but just to be quite monotone. And he maybe, the inference in the dialogue you can't understand because I don't speak Spanish, but in the subtitles you hear him really enjoying it and see him in his dialogues seem to be really enjoying it, but you never leave her face and never lose connection with her and her feelings about this, because she never seems to fully or totally succumb to what he's demanding of her. I think that's a really tricky thing to do, particularly with a shot like that, because it's her face here and you see her movement, the rhythm constantly. And yeah, I just was really impressed by that, I never felt uncomfortable.
Such an amazing thing to honour, just this idea of what's going on in her head.
Totally. And
kind of by virtue of the idea of that shot too, is that by focusing on the face, you're separating the images in the mind from the body.
Totally.
Too. So it's almost like a disconnection and an emotional moment.
Yeah, definitely. And it wasn't ever sexualized in that you didn't feel voyeuristic in that way. You felt, or complicit, I guess, because of your voyeurism. You felt an empathy for her. They shot it through a reflection of a mirror, so there was another dissociation. It's just really clever, really simple, clever filmmaking.
So it was obviously uncomfortable. Was it funny as well?
Yeah, because it goes for so long. You're watching it and you go, "Ooh, whoa, uncomfortable," and then because it keeps going, and she just goes into this monotone, but that isn't so monotone that you're like, well, she's being raped. It's monotone that she's like, I'm just getting through my day, my business. This is my work, and this fucking sucks. Excuse me, I'm swearing a lot. But that you empathise with that. You're like, well, yeah, I hate my job too sometimes, but I don't. That's not my job. But it was a real sensitive way and a confronting way to shoot the scene.
It seems like that's really the conversation now about cinema, though, isn't it? When we all talk about what's it doing for narrative, what's the perspective, that it's just not enough to just sort of show it by rote, as you said, by those 4 shots. It's like there's so much more opportunity for investigation and for kind of deep thought about what this does to us. Because that's what I realised making this film actually, is that that narrative is not events that occur. Narrative is how those events affect people.
Yes.
It's not a chain of events. It's what's the flicker of the moment afterward, or the perspective that comes to the incident that tells us what it's doing to people.
And one of the effects that sex scenes can have when they're done in a way that's outside of the traditional formula is to create a sense of shock or transgression. And that can be a very potent effect on an audience. It can sort of take away some of your barriers. I remember the opening scene of Betty Blue, and there's this long sex scene in it, and I went there with.
It's quite explicit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty, Yeah, it's serious. It's serious. But the thing in particular that it did was it just went on and on and on, and it made me aware at the time. Apart from the paradox of feeling aroused in the public space where you shouldn't be, there was that. There was the feeling of being really uncomfortable with the I went with some friends, and that's not what you do with those friends. You have dinner, you talk about things, and the fact that it just broke every formula for how and made me aware. I'm just used to seeing sex in a certain way, so it is a comfortable way, and this was sex as discomfort, and I thought that, for instance, was a very effective sex scene because it sort of affected me.
Outside of Top of the Lake, and even irrespective of that or my involvement of that, I think the Jane is just the apex of that in our cinema. And one particular story, just in terms of discomfort, was I loved the piano when I was about 14 years old, I think, when I saw the piano, and I was completely obsessed by this film. And the sexuality in that film is extraordinary. The language of that sexuality and what it has to say about the knowledge of sex for people at that time when in this kind of Puritan mould where people wouldn't have actually ever been told what it was, and Sam Neill, his character, has to discover it by watching this other man explore sex with his wife. And it's just so confronting. But because I loved it so much, I was desperate to see Holy Smoke when it came out. I was about 16 years old and I took my mum. So I don't know if any of you have seen Holy Smoke, but I remember distinctly sitting there at 16 years old. I don't know whether or not I had a hard on at this point. I was so... But Kate Winslet pisses on herself in the desert to seduce Harvey Keitel. She's naked, she pisses on herself, and then it just cuts to his ass just fucking from behind and her yelling, don't come, and him going, oh. I was just like, I could have melted.
Things not to do with your mother.
Just don't do that with your mum. Yeah. Anyway.
Teenage years aside, you guys are all sounding like very accomplished experts, but obviously we all start as amateurs. So I'm interested to hear about the cringe moments or the awkwardness or difficulties of directing sex scenes maybe early on. I know, Tony, I think you had a good story there.
Okay. I made a film called Home Song Stories in 2006, and I had one of the most beautiful, and it was autobiographical, and I had one of the most beautiful women in the world playing my mother, Joan Chen, and I had this phenomenal and phenomenally handsome Singaporean actor, Chi Yu Wu, playing her lover at the time, and there was one sex scene, and Joan was a real trooper. But what I hadn't realised is that Singaporean actors just like they never do sex scenes. Like it's just not part of the cinema vernacular in Singapore. They don't do nude scenes. In fact, the film released in Singapore, and the big sell, the marketing sell was Singaporean actor does a nude scene. Oh. that was the. But Great. Anyway, I was directing this scene. It was in a car. Joan was on top. She was doing her level best to make it work. He was kind of awkward, but incredibly beautiful. And halfway through the scene, I realised I'm directing my mother to have sex. and instead of saying cut, I just said stop. And we just did one take.
But
was it actually like outside? Was it actually a kind of moment of horror, like almost?
No. It's just one of those moments where I suddenly thought, this is what I'm doing. I can't do this. And so I stopped. And we made it work with what we had.
Like sex, it's just about communication, and really clear communication, and not feeling like you're going to feel like a fool by speaking. It's better to speak and say it, I think.
Is it?
I think, it's funny because the subtext of this whole conversation is also we're aware that we're talking in a climate where, sex culture, stuff around film has sort of, in a really amazing way, sort of shattered the global landscape of how we think about this stuff at the moment. So I think that sort of transparency and that sort of thoughtfulness is really important.
Just as a quick thing that might help, hands are very intimate. And I know that as a get-to-know-you sort of sequence, I think the dinner thing is a great idea, but then perhaps on set, if you have the time or rehearsal, there's an exercise you can do where you sit opposite your fellow actor and your hands communicate, and that's it. You can't look at each other in the eye, or you ask them not to look at each other in the eye, and then you just allow your hands to sit like this, and then at some point they talk, like you just move them towards each other. And what it does is create a really foundational and true, authentic intimacy. It can be very intimate, which is why I would recommend not looking them in the eye.
That's
or them looking at each other in the eye.
I know Jennifer Kent, who just made The Nightingale, which is about to play in competition at Venice. She talks about working with that process a lot with some really tough material that's in The Nightingale, really tough stuff.
With the hand exercise?
Yeah.
Oh, love that.
There's a interesting documentary, 3-part documentary that some of us watched. I only watched 2 episodes, called Indie Sex. And what's interesting about that I sort of came to and found most interesting is that how sex has been approached in the media throughout the last 100 years, really. And it has actually gone from being quite conservative to being very liberal to then being very conservative again and coy and then being liberal and explicit. And it sort of goes in stages. And it was interesting for me looking back and seeing they sort of chart on a timeline. And when they came in for certain films like American Pie, how old I was, looking at how old I was when I saw that or when that sort of approached the cinema and thinking, oh, that actually did set up sort of some things in my brain about how I perceive men in the world and how I perceive men enjoy sex or what they expect from sex or oral sex, as you say. And also what was the other one? Then it leads into like Princess Diaries and that kind of like very romanticized version of what love or intimacy is. And it is interesting what you say, because I think we do get so much of our information from the media and what the popular media is at the time. And I think now, the challenge is that because there's so much media and information available to young people on the internet, that it's probably up to us as filmmakers to create something that is a lot more authentic and honest and is a more balanced view of what we hope a more a happier sexual relationship would be with yourself and with the person that you choose to do that with.
It's tragic what young men are fed.
Yeah.
I think, and it causes just so much devastation in this society, the way that sort of stuff is imparted. And that's why I brought up that film Hail before, because I think, no young man is ready to absorb that yet. I don't know how you counter that stuff and I don't know how you approach that sort of stuff. But if you could get them to understand what's going on between those two people in Hail, I think that would just be spectacular for the whole society.
But the thing that Sarah was saying earlier, which I really connected to, is that in spite of all the representations of sex throughout our history, so rarely do you actually get a feeling of the truth of sex, the messy, gritty reality of sex. Like, so it's so rare that you get, what actually happens to the sperm, like what, like,
Where is it?
the visceral, the true viscera of sex. So I think there's, weirdly enough, a lot still to be somehow represented or dealt with in how we talk about sex.
I think the material's going to guide you there, I think in terms of what you select to deal with, just in terms of the actual subject matter, that's going to guide you to necessarily who's it depicting, who's it talking about, and what sort of sex you're going to see. As I said in my first film, I'm directing a gay sex scene between two young men, and the reason for that and the reason for dealing with that was because, as I said, I felt it was necessary for the context of the film, but also actually the consequence of it and the meaning of it was that one of them was using the other. That's a film about theft. It's a film about theft in relationships, and journalism as theft, and art as theft, and certainly cinema also. That's part of it. So that led me to, to try to show as authentically as I could, a sexual scene between two men. And again, I have no experience of that.
I think it is absolutely important because, as we've been saying, that's where, we all start as amateurs. Like, we're all fumbling around in the dark. And the only real way as humans to learn about sex is to either engage with it and do it yourself or watch it on screen. And I think that to have diversity in the types of sex, in the types of people who engage in sex, in racial diversity, like, everything.
And body types. Body types. That's the big taboo.
Types,
you just don't see people of certain body types have sex.
Absolutely. Then there's just more material that is accessible to people as teenagers, as amateurs, as people who are maybe not so confident with their body type or what their sexuality even, to go, oh, okay, here's a little blueprint, let me try that, to feel a little more confident, a little safer in the world, I guess. So yeah, absolutely.
Is there also an opportunity for writers to not default to beautiful white people and directors to not default to beautiful white people.
Yeah, absolutely.
when
But
they're
again,
casting.
that's the material. That's
Yeah.
the material that you
Exactly.
choose to deal with. I think to insist on that sort of thing purely in terms of sex, almost like treating it like an island within the film, I think would not be the right way to approach that. But it would be the
part of
source of the material and the diversity of the material itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Which,
and
Tony, you've created an enormous amount of work like that, like dealing with people from all backgrounds. I mean, even in something like The Slap, it's...
Yeah. I do think it's the responsibility of the maker. And it's your personal investment in those sort of stories. That will facilitate. So I would just say, make the story yourself. Make the story you want to see.
I think it's really Lust Caution, which is Ang Lee's film that went on to win the Palme
That's
d'Or.
incredible. It's
It's
an
astonishing.
incredible film.
If any of you haven't seen that film, I would urge you to go out and watch Lust Caution. As I said, an absolutely horrible end to that film. I think personally the last 10 minutes should just be cut off. But the storytelling through the sex, the physicality of the sex, and isn't it? I don't know if you remember this, Tony, but there's a look on Tony Leung's face when this very timid young woman who's joined this sort of revolutionary group in their first sex scene, and it is just so wild and so physical, and there's this, and I'm sure, as I said, I'm sure it's real, and there's this look of absolute shock that comes over him that he's sort of confronting this force. I mean, that's a pretty mainstream filmmaker choosing to tell a story that way. I don't think studios would let you do that stuff. I mean, you're certainly not going to see it in a Marvel film. Though that'd be amazing with superpowers.
Oh, except Kate Shortland's directing one.
Yeah, right.
I think you're going to see a lot in Black Widow.
Yeah, fantastic.
I would also say with the studios, so often so many people are getting a pass at the final cut and the edit and approval over that look, and what Tom was saying about the conversation being shattered at the moment around sexuality and sex on film and gender, just that huge conversation that's going on now. I would hope that is changing, but so much in recent history has been dictated by heterosexual white men, and so
It's the lens, isn't it?
It's
the lens that
and so what you're getting is a
changing.
very watered down, very usually female objectified in mainstream cinema.
One of the things we haven't even touched upon, which will be maybe another hour somewhere else, is the whole mystification of the phallus, and the fact that the phallus is never represented in sex, and that there and the kind of relationship between that and power and patriarchy. Because I think there is a clear line about because
And
you hold power
maybe,
when you hold power when you don't show.
Yeah.
Is there a double standard there when you're dealing with broadcasters, when
Absolutely.
you're dealing with distributors?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, that would be
There's
that would be down to the contracts and that sort of thing. Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I mean, I got it was for a show that I'm doing now. I didn't have a flight booked on my way to the airport to fly within an hour if I hadn't signed the contract soon, when they called at the 11th hour to say, oh, well, just nudity clause. We put a nudity clause in so that we could allow to show your tits and ass if we want to at some point. And I just went, no, I'm just not getting on the plane. I'm not going to put that in. If you had approached me a week earlier, even we could discuss this. But no, absolutely not.
You said no,
Yeah.
and you're doing the show.
Bravo.
Fucking awesome.
Yeah,
Bravo.
because
Great.
and I'm not a prude. I've done sex scenes before. I'm more than willing to talk about it with the director on the day, and if it's narratively necessary for the script. But it's with a company that's known for its unjudicious use of TNA and not very much use of full frontal male nudity and
DNA.
T and A. They got enough without mine.
It's really touchy, this sort of stuff. But that issue of male insecurity and male weakness, perceived weakness, and that sort of stuff is so cancerous. We were just talking about this before, in so many levels of society, but certainly on film sets. I have a former partner of mine who was filming a scene, major network in Australia, and sex scenes, and the guys that were working with her decided that they needed to, stay cool, stay cool, don't give away too much, hold on to the power. And as a result, it was totally shit traumatic experience for her, and she ended up on the front page of the paper, and they're damn lucky she hasn't spoken their names. Just this quality of respect and care for one another. That's it. Yeah.
Sarah, do you have any final words in terms of anything you would like directors, particularly new directors, to think about when they approach this kind of situation?
I liked what you were saying before, Tony, about allowing the actors to sort of direct it. And I think the problem with that, the initial problem with that I know that I would come up against is talking to someone who you've maybe met 3 weeks before, 3 days before, possibly even 3 hours before, and then you have to simulate an intense relationship, a very intimate relationship. Perhaps you've been married for 20 years, perhaps you've only just met, who knows. But either way, it's very exposing, very vulnerable, very raw. And the difficulty I know in the initial to go, well, let's direct it ourselves, is that you don't want to be like, oh, what if I put my hand here? Yeah. Is that okay with you? Do you, what, is that sexy? So I think what this gentleman down here is doing in terms of allowing the actors to get to know each other in a safe space without pressure, without pressure of time or any of that, because so much about a set is time, and you don't get a lot of that at all. And then to waste it on the actors getting to know each other, it can as an actor you feel like, well, quick, got to jump in, got to learn quickly. However, I think that is a great sort of, once you can get that intimacy and respect, mutual respect and consensual agreement to know how to engage with each other's bodies, then to be able to direct yourself with the director in hand is probably the best way to approach it.
Awesome. And it's also like, there's a lot of talk about these days, just returning to that too, there's a lot of talk about treating it like fight choreography too, making sure you do it beforehand just so people are safe.
Or
really
dance.
Going through it. Or dance. Yeah. And treat it like that, yeah. And make it clear to them that they're not required to bring, emotion necessarily to it, unless you're going to rehearse that very carefully,
Yeah, I've been in on a set once where I didn't have responsibility as actor or crew, and so I was available, I guess, in that sense. And there was quite a violent sexual act being perpetrated on screen, and the young boy who was involved with that found it very troubling and traumatic. And I felt that it was difficult for the filmmakers at large to be able to help him because they just had to get on with the work they were doing. And it was difficult and traumatic for everybody to watch, but they were able to deal with it in a different way. They're able to very easily separate, arm's length, turn around, not engage. So this is just as a practical trick, if you are directors or actors, doing something that will allow your body to acknowledge the unreality of the situation is really helpful. So even just sitting in a moment of silence with someone, not asking how you feel, are you okay, blah, 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 just sitting and having some camaraderie with someone in a moment of silence and going, okay, you could just, if it's physical, then there's a way you can like rhythmically pat your body down and go, okay, this is a reality now. What was before is no longer a reality, and you're changing the physical shape and nature of your body in that moment. That's just a practical way of dealing with it. But
I think in terms of the crew now, I've never had to deal with a serious scene of sexual violence, but I think that's absolutely right. I think that accountability to everybody that you're working with is really important. Again, it's communication with everyone. I think it'd be having to make sure everybody was looked after, and not only the actors but everybody, but also just practically when you shoot sex scenes on film, bizarrely, because everyone's going to see it in the movie, but to support everybody, it's not bizarre at all. It's important. It's usually what we call a closed set, so it'll just be DOP, first AC, focus puller, director of photography and the focus puller, sound recordist, unless they even place a mic. Sometimes you can place a mic and record with a remote mic, and the director and the actors. And that's all you require. And sometimes there'll be somebody from wardrobe standing there pushed against a wall like this, holding a dressing gown so they can run in and throw it on them the minute you call cut.
It's just, yeah, it's what you said before about trust and respect to everyone involved, and whether it's a scene of sexual love or sexual violence. I think making sure that everyone feels as safe and comfortable, and that there's honest discussion around it, so that people feel respected and people feel.
I mean, even to the point of saying, if you feel uncomfortable, if anyone in the crew feels uncomfortable, please, go and step outside and sit down and have a cup of tea.
But also, I guess, like facing in terms of like a depiction of sexual violence on screen, facing the nature of that and going, if you are putting it into screen anyway, you're making it a reality in some person's life as an actor who has to perpetrate it to another person, and that could be just as difficult as having it happen to you as an actor. And that really we should be discussing these kinds of things anyway, that it would be a disservice to us as a human group of people, a society, to go, oh yeah, we're just going to quickly shoot this rape scene and this sexual assault scene, and then we'll just move on and get ready for the next one because we've got to get lunch.
I think
not
it's
the
probably,
purpose.
if you're going to do that, you just have to be so choreographed in the way you do it. You have to be so mechanical and break it down so it doesn't feel real. I had to do a scene once where it was an attempted rape, and afterwards, I mean, the actress, we just broke it down to exactly what movement was, each thing was, and she felt safe, but the actor afterwards had to go into the toilet and cry. He was so upset by having to do that. And, so we had to spend a lot of time talking about it afterwards.
And also, you don't want to have to share, if you have had experience of sexual violence in your own life, you don't want to have to share that past just because it is your job in this moment to portray that again. But creating a safe space that allows very detailed precision and exposure within a safe space is just paramount, I think.
I think that is a perfect moment for us to wrap up this very interesting conversation. May it be the first of many. Thank you, guys. It's been fascinating talking to you all. Thank you for your questions and for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the festival. We love MIFF. And I forgot... Yeah.
And thanks, Beck.
Thank you. Thank you.